Catelyn Stark first felt the chill of suspicion late one mist-shrouded evening as she walked along the ramparts of Riverrun. The damp wind from the tumblestone curled around her like a serpent, cold and probing. She clutched her cloak tighter to keep out the moisture, but nothing could shield her from the uneasy whisper that had taken root in her heart. Weeks remained before her son Robb, king in the north, would venture to the Twins for his uncle's wedding, yet already the future felt dim and the sky too low. It began, most subtly, with a half-heard conversation while she was crossing one of Riverrun's airy corridors. A man-at-arms, one of Roose Bolton's, if she recalled the sigil on his surcoat, had spoken in hushed tones to another retainer. She had paused behind a thick tapestry, uncertain whether it was her place to pry. But the clipped voices and references to late-night talks and fry negotiations sent a shiver through her. Something about their tone, the urgency in it, reminded her of how whispers of wrongdoing scuttle along the edges of corridors like furtive rats. She held her breath, straining to decipher more from between the tapestry's rich threads. The men departed, leaving only the faint echo of their footsteps and the emptiness of her misgivings. She recalled that Bolton's men had always seemed distant, pale as their lord, as if they belonged to shadows rather than honest sunlight. Now, their reticence weighed heavier on her. She could have dismissed it, men might chatter about the wedding after all, but doubt fermented in her thoughts. In the days that followed, she watched more keenly, noticing that Roose Bolton himself had grown increasingly quiet, often departing from council gatherings with little explanation. His measured courtesies felt like a mask. Behind that calm facade, she suspected a tempest of calculation. Cat spent her days sifting through the quiet corners of her mind for reasons that she might be overreacting. Grief and war-weariness could conjure illusions, feeding fear until it was mistaken for fact. Gods knew she had more than her share of sorrow. Yet after all that tragedy, the beheading of her beloved Ned, the seeming deaths of Bran and Rickon, the endless bloodshed that hounded Robb's campaign, she had learned to trust her instincts. This time, she sensed a hidden fang behind every conciliatory smile Roose Bolton offered. When she confided these suspicions to Robb in private, he gave her a pained, puzzled look. The flickering hearth cast shadows across his stern young face, highlighting the growing weariness in his eyes. He was a king pressed on every side, by the Lannisters to the south, by the Ironborn devouring the northern coasts, and by the tenuous alliances that the North had patched together out of necessity. He needed every banner he could rally, and the Bolton name held weight in the North. "Mother," he said quietly, "there's no cause for alarm. Lord Bolton has fought at my side in battles we both nearly died in. He even married a Fry cousin, a gesture of his loyalty. Are we to suspect every man who might keep secrets? We're at war. Secrets are the coin of spies, not necessarily betrayal." She listened to him calmly, though her heart twisted. "I know you trust in him, Robb. I know we must trust each other. But that man's eyes are too still. I remember how he let you discover my release of the Kingslayer. He said nothing at the time, only watched, as if he were a hound waiting for his master's signal." She breathed deeply, remembering that dreadful day of revelation. She had defied Robb's orders for the chance to exchange Jaime Lannister for her daughter's freedom, a gamble that might have lost her all claim on her son's good opinion had he been a crueler boy. He is not a man who forgives lightly. I don't think he's a man who forgives at all. Perhaps he still holds that act against me and you. Robb's gaze flickered toward the door, as though worried that even the thick walls might have ears. "We need every ally. I can't go accusing him without proof." If he has turned, the notion made him close his eyes for a brief, heavy-lidded moment. He was so young to bear such burdens. "What do you propose we do, Mother?" "Watch him," she said, setting her jaw. "No. More than that, test him. See what whispers flow back to him. Learn who he speaks within quiet corners. Gather small pieces of truth until we have enough of them to form a knife with which we can cut our enemies from our side." She placed a hand on Robb's cheek, trying to banish the sorrow from his face. "I only pray to the gods that I'm mistaken." But she was not mistaken. 3 days later, Catelyn ventured into the smaller library of Riverrun, where the late Ser Stevran Frey's letters were stored from negotiations and the earlier siege. While she knew the Freys had reason to resent the king in the north for slighting their hospitality by marrying Jane Westerling, there had been a promise of appeasement with the wedding of Edmure Tully to Rosalind Frey. Walder Frey was sullen and grudging, but he was cunning enough to accept a second chance at forging ties with the Tullys and Starks. Still, old Walder's cunning might be sharpened by outside influences. She pored over correspondences by candlelight, sifting references to strongholds, supply lines, and old grievances. She found passing mentions of the Boltons from a half-year prior. Something about negotiations that Walder Frey had wanted to open but was turned down by one of Bolton's stewards. The dryness of the letters offered no direct proof of conspiracy, yet her unease only grew as she realized that Bolton and Fry had danced around each other for months, carefully, quietly. As the hours passed, the flames burned the candle down to a stub. She stifled a yawn, feeling the ache in her neck from leaning over the letters. That was when a presence flickered near the door, a faint clink of metal, the hush of boots on stone. She glanced up sharply. Brienne of Tarth stood there, massive in the flickering gloom. Cat motioned her forward. "Have you been standing there long?" "Only a moment, my lady," said Brienne in her low, husky voice. "I was making the rounds, ensuring your safety." She then stepped closer, her sword's pommel glinting in the dying light. "Your face is troubled. May I help in any way?" Catelyn felt a rush of affection for the earnest young warrior. Brienne had been her champion since the day she freed Jaime, though the plan had ultimately undone them in some ways. Still, she found Brienne's honesty refreshing. She eyed the table of letters. "I'm trying to piece together something. I don't even know if it's real. But Lord Bolton's men have grown too quiet, and Lord Bolton himself is nowhere to be found at odd hours." Brienne nodded thoughtfully. "I can keep an eye on him if you wish, my lady. I'm not the best at stealth, but I can watch his comings and goings, note who he meets." Catelyn's smile rose from genuine relief. "Yes, but be cautious. This must be done with subtlety." Brienne bowed her head, then left, her heavy footsteps echoing down the corridor. Thus began the watchfulness. For the next fortnight, Brienne and a few of Catelyn's most trusted guardsmen kept track of every time Roose Bolton's retinue rode out, every time a message arrived for them bearing no visible sigil. They grew certain that a quiet correspondence flowed between the dread fort and the twins, bypassing direct scrutiny. Once or twice, Brienne managed to observe Bolton speaking to one of Walder Frey's lesser-known sons, skulking in dim corners. Their words were never overheard clearly each time. Either the men parted quickly or the watchers had to withdraw to avoid detection. Then came a slip. One midnight, as the last feeble rays of moonlight crossed the courtyard, Brienne spotted a figure in a dark cloak hurrying from Bolton's quarters. She followed, silent as possible in her mail. The figure led her out of the castle walls into the nearby forest. Fear coiled in her chest. She knew it was dangerous to leave the security of Riverrun's gates alone, yet she persevered. Through a clearing, she finally saw the cloaked shape greet a second figure. Even at a distance, Brienne recognized the second man as one of Walder Frey's brood. A leather bag changed hands, and a few words of heated conversation drifted on the night wind. The only phrases Brienne could make out were, "Timing is crucial," and "Lord Bolton expects it before the wedding." Those words might have been innocent by themselves, but in the context of all Cat's suspicions, they glowed like a beacon of treachery. Brienne, having heard enough, slipped back into the castle as quietly as she dared, every nerve thrumming. By dawn, Catelyn had the news. She was no longer left with a swirl of unfounded suspicion. Now she had the shape of a serpent, one that coiled between the dread fort and the twins. Yet proof of wrongdoing was still intangible, and that was the trick. More than once, Catelyn's mind lingered on how swiftly Lord Tywin Lannister might handle such an issue. He would lay a trap, wait for the conspirators to step wrong, and crush them all at once. A year ago, she might have balked at such ruthlessness, but war had stripped her illusions. If indeed Roose Bolton conspired with Walder Frey to break the Stark's cause, perhaps even to end Robb's life, she needed a plan at least as cunning as the spider's web they wove. She confided her discoveries to Robb again. In the hush of his council chamber, she laid out every detail Brienne had gleaned: the letters that suggested a hidden rapport, the cryptic meeting at midnight. A slow storm gathered in Robb's eyes as she spoke, anger flickering across his brow. "If it's true," he began. "We must assume it is," Catelyn said, each word carved in iron. "We can't wait to see if they unsheathe their knives at the twins. By then, it would be too late. I will not lose another son to a cunning betrayal." Grey Wind, at Robb's side, growled low, as if he too sensed the tension. Robb's jaw clenched. "We still need the wedding. Uncle Edmure's match to Rosalind Frey must proceed. House Frey has many swords. If we throw this wedding aside, we lose them forever, and half the Riverlands might turn against us. The late Lord Hoster wanted Edmure to keep peace with the Freys. We can't just declare them enemies without proof. The war is balanced on a knife's edge." "I know," said Catelyn softly, "but perhaps we can snatch that knife away before it draws our blood. We cannot announce that we suspect them. Instead, let us pretend ignorance." Let us go to the twins as if we expect to celebrate. Meanwhile, we must gather loyal men. Leave many of them hidden or disguised nearby, should Walder Frey or Roose Bolton plan to trap us. Then we turn the tables on them. Robb's brow furrowed. He was not the boy who had ridden south to avenge his father. Experience had hardened him, forced him to weigh every choice in the currency of men's lives. We'll need men we trust, he said. Great John Umber, Lord Karstark. He paused, remembering Karstark's imprisonment and fate. He's no longer with us, he murmured. Well, Blackfish is with us, as is Wyman Manderley in spirit, though his strength is bound in White Harbor. We'll gather who we can quietly. Catelyn found her own heart bruised by the reminder of how much had been lost. Still, she pressed forward. Yes, we must do it all quietly, swiftly. Are you willing, Robb? For a moment, the old despair flickered in his expression. So many battles, so many betrayals. He was but a young man facing monstrous burdens. Then he nodded, solid and resolute. I am. If it means preserving our house, I will do whatever it takes. They wasted no time. Careful messages went out to certain lords. The Great John, boisterous but loyal, was instructed to gather men behind the hills north of the twins, to remain unseen until a given signal or a set day. A portion of the Riverrun garrison would remain behind to protect the fortress, but Cat selected a score of men she trusted beyond question to ride with them under the guise of simple guards. Edmure, though reluctant to believe the worst of Walder Frey, agreed to do his part. He was not privy to every detail, for fear he might betray too much in his frustration. She told her brother only that there might be an ambush, so be prepared to do as she asked, no matter how bizarre the request might sound in the moment. Roose Bolton continued to smile his thin smile when they spoke of the journey ahead. He offered polite commentary on the wedding, inquiring after Edmure's preferences for wines or gifts. The courtesy was so smooth and measured that Catelyn felt ill with dread. A lesser conspirator might show strain, a crack in the facade. Bolton offered nothing but a faint politeness, as though a well of black water rested under a frozen surface. She prayed that when the time came, her hand would not tremble in striking him. Days slipped by, each moment pressed with tension. The host was assembled and began its slow march north, crossing the bleak, misty plains of the Riverlands, forging a path toward the twins. The roads wound along the banks of the Green Fork, overshadowed by the threat of roving bandits or Lannister outriders. At every camp, Cat observed how Bolton's men took watch. They reported to him in hushed voices at dawn. Occasionally, she noticed a small knot of Frey envoys near Bolton's tent. She kept her expression carefully neutral whenever she noticed it, grateful that the watchers she employed could track those movements. Each new observation only solidified her belief. A trap was being prepared at the twins, but the conspirators were not yet aware that their quarry was fully alert. The journey took on a strange, subdued quality. Edmure's optimism had become forced, as if he tried to will himself into a celebratory mood, though it never ignited. Blackfish scouted ahead, making sure that no hidden force lay in wait on the path. Robb cloistered himself with Grey Wind, wrestling with the anxiety of the coming confrontation. And Catelyn, she prayed more earnestly than ever before. She prayed to the Seven, to the old gods, even to the river itself that had borne her father's ashes. She prayed she would not let House Stark down yet again. At last, the twins came into view. The sun sank low in the sky, painting the great towers in dusky orange. The water of the Green Fork rippled in black ribbons beneath the monstrous fortress, which straddled the crossing. Those twin keeps looked less like welcoming halls and more like stern guardians marking the entrance to a place of danger. Walder Frey's banners hung limp from the battlements, and men with crossbows peered down from arrow slits. The column approached with Robb, Edmure, and Catelyn at the forefront. Roose Bolton flanked them, the leathers of his pale armor gleaming in the dying light. Robb signaled a standard-bearer, and the Stark banner was raised high, the direwolf on a field of gray, proud and defiant. From the walls, Frey trumpets answered, and the gate swung open to admit them. Cat reminded herself to keep her spine straight. She tried to flatten the quake of her heart. This was the threshold to a place where betrayal lurked like a well-planned murder. Walder Frey received them in the main hall with a show of courtesy, enough to seem polite, but so sparse it bordered on insolence. He was an ancient man, spare of hair, watery of eye, his many heirs and grandsons forming a thick crowd behind him. They parted as Catelyn and her kin approached. Rosalind Frey, Edmure's young bride-to-be, stood quietly at her father's side, eyes downcast. The once promised paramours of Robb cast him accusing glances from behind Walder Frey's chair, though no one spoke of Robb's broken vow. The old lord's expression was sour and triumphant in equal measure. "Welcome, King in the North," Walder said, his voice carrying a rasp of condescension. "And welcome, my lady Catelyn. I see you're both well. Let us hope your presence here bodes better fortune for us all than the last time House Stark was my guest." Robb inclined his head. "We come in good faith, Lord Frey. My uncle is eager to seal our houses in marriage." Walder's lips twisted. "Aye, the wedding. We shall feast, and then we shall see my daughter properly wed." He let a pause stretch. "And the rest of you shall be my honored guests for as long as you like." Catelyn noted how his eyes flicked momentarily to Roose Bolton. The flicker might have been too quick for most to notice, but she caught it. Her nails bit into her palm under the concealing fold of her cloak. "Stay calm," she told herself. "Show no sign. Let them believe we remain unsuspecting." That evening passed in uneasy formality. The Freys prepared a feast of sorts, though it was more perfunctory than truly sumptuous. Platters of roast mutton, trenchers of gravy-soaked bread, sour wine. The music was stiff, the minstrels half-hearted. More men than usual thronged the hall, many wearing Frey colors, others a smattering of Northmen or Riverlanders. Bolton's seat was near Robb's, but not too near. Cat forced herself to smile at guests, responding in polite courtesy. All the while, her senses ranged over every inch of the hall, the banners, the dais, the tables near the door, the archers posted at the edges. She saw too many watchers in the corners, too many men in steel beneath their best doublets. At one point, she was certain Bolton's pale eyes rested on her longer than was polite. She pretended not to notice. Before the hour was through, she excused herself with a show of weariness. Once away from prying eyes, she dashed through the corridors to where the Grachan's men were stabling their horses. She found a handful of them who had slipped inside discreetly, disguised as stable hands or scribes. They confirmed that Great John Umber and his main force were concealed a few miles away by the cover of an outlying forest. All was in readiness for the plan that she and Robb had devised. She whispered final instructions, urging them to vigilance. If all went well, the trap would be turned on the conspirators before they could launch their own. The men left to resume their discreet roles, leaving Catelyn alone in the gloom of the stables. A single lantern swayed from a hook, casting jittery shadows on the straw-strewn floor. She heard a soft nicker from one of the horses. She could smell the animals, the tang of their sweat. A sense of dread pressed upon her like the stable roof pressing down. Once they sprang this deception, there would be no turning back. If they failed, if they were undone by a single slip, the entire cause of House Stark might drown in blood. But she could not return to her chambers. She had to do something more. Slipping along the quieter passages, she sought out the small sept that the Freys maintained. She knew it was unlikely to be occupied at this hour. Walder Frey was hardly a devout man. Perhaps there, among the flickering candles and the statues of the Seven, she might steal her resolve. She was not pious by the standards of some, but the gods were all she had to cling to in this final stretch of nerve-wracking uncertainty. The sept was indeed empty. She lit a taper, knelt before the mother's statue, and tried to find words to voice her fears. She prayed that the gods would keep Robb safe, that they would grant her cunning enough to thwart the treachery of Bolton and Frey. She prayed for all her missing children, Sansa a hostage in King's Landing, Arya lost somewhere in the war-torn lands, Bran and Rickon rumored dead but unconfirmed. She prayed for Ned's spirit, that he might stand guard over them. The candlelight made the marble faces of the statues loom with an otherworldly glow. "You pray too much, Lady Stark," came a soft voice from behind her. She started, nearly dropping her taper. Spinning around, she saw Roose Bolton standing just within the sept door. He had entered so silently she thought him a ghost. His face was calm as ever, only his pale eyes shimmering in the candle glow. She rose slowly, collecting herself. "Lord Bolton," she said evenly, though her heart thundered. "You startled me. I did not hear you." He took a few steps closer, the gentle clink of his boots on the sept floor seeming ominous. "Forgive me. I often find respite in quiet places. The battlefield is all noise, is it not?" A faint smile touched his thin lips. "If you're praying for the safety of your son, rest assured the gods know how dear he is to you." Catelyn's mind raced. Did he suspect that she was on to him? She Or was this merely the careful routine of a hunter cornering his prey? She forced an exhale. All mothers pray for their sons, Lord Bolton, and for their families, for the realm, for the chance to see peace again. Peace, he echoed, stepping closer to the row of candles. The reflection of the little flames danced in his eyes. Yes, it is a rare gift these days. Perhaps the wedding will herald a new era of peace for us all. House Fry, House Tully, House Stark, House Bolton, united. She inclined her head, keeping her expression carefully schooled. That would be a blessing indeed. He gave no further remark, only a contemplative silence before turning to depart. At the threshold, he paused, glancing back. Be careful where you wander at night, my lady. The twins can be confusing for those who do not know its passageways. It's all too easy to lose yourself. A chill went down her spine, but she only offered him a gracious nod. Your concern is noted, Lord Bolton. When he was gone, she realized her hands were trembling. She did not light any more candles. The hour was late, and tomorrow would be Edmure's wedding day, the day that Walder Frey and Roose Bolton presumably planned to spring their treachery. And it would also be the day that House Stark would strike first. Morning came clad in pale light and the swirl of activity. The courtyard bustled with Frey men preparing the wedding dais and decorating the halls with limp streamers. Musicians tuned their instruments. Edmure paced, half nervous, half irritated, checking on the wedding preparations. Walder Frey kept glancing at the visitors from the corners of his watery eyes, occasionally barking instructions at his brood. Roose Bolton vanished for a time, no doubt finalizing his own hidden arrangements. Catelyn did her part, feigning interest in the ribbons and the wineskins. She visited Rosalind, who seemed sweet and frightened, though she tried to put on a brave face. Kat felt a pang of pity for the girl. This was not truly Rosalind's doing. She wondered if Rosalind had any inkling of the betrayal swirling around her father. Probably not. The poor girl seemed too gentle to be in league with Walder's cruelties. As the day wore on, tension coiled. The wedding ceremony itself took place in the castle's modest September. The air was close and stale, as though the place itself held its breath. Walder Frey placed Rosalind's hand in Edmure's with a flourish of condescending remarks. But the binding itself was overshadowed by the fear that at any moment, knives might be drawn. Kat kept her eyes roving. She observed the crowd. Roose Bolton stood near the front, hands clasped behind his back, face impassive. When Edmure bent to kiss his bride, Kat noticed a flicker in Bolton's expression. Something calculating, like a man anticipating an opportunity mere heartbeats away. Once the vows were completed, the wedding party moved to the great hall, where the feast awaited. By custom, it was a moment of celebration. Walder Frey had commanded that music and wine flow freely, to put on the appearance of generosity. In the rafters, crossbowmen nestled, waiting. Kat had spotted them earlier. She saw them now as vague shapes behind the battlements overhead. She wondered how many more men at arms lurked behind hidden doors. How many illusions had been prepared to put the Starks off their guard. Robb took his seat at the high table. Grey Wind was nowhere to be seen. Walder Frey had insisted that the dire wolf remain outside, something about not wanting the beast in the hall for the wedding. But Kat and Robb had anticipated that. A contingent of loyal men guarded Grey Wind in the yard, ready to release him at a moment's notice. Walder's brood stared darkly at the Stark retinue, as if waiting for a signal. The tension in the air was like a drawn bowstring about to snap. Kat forced laughter when old Walder made a crude joke about Edmure's wedding night. She feigned good humor in the toasts, lifting her wine cup but barely sipping. She waited, pulse hammering. The plan required that they let the wedding celebration begin in earnest. Let Walder and Bolton grow confident, certain that the Starks were truly oblivious. And then, when they felt the moment was ripe, the Starks would act. All around, the guests indulged in watery ale and oversalted stew. The minstrels played a variety of tunes, some sprightly, some oddly somber. Kat watched Lord Bolton's face whenever the music changed, looking for a sign that he was about to give a signal. The men in the rafters seemed increasingly restless. Walder Frey's lips were twisted into a poor semblance of a smile. He was mocking them, Kat realized. He thought he was on the brink of wiping out House Stark, rewriting the shape of the war with one savage stroke. But at last, the moment arrived. One of Bolton's men slipped to the side of the hall, a place near the dais. His posture changed as if tensing. Walder Frye rapped his cane on the floor. The minstrels shifted abruptly to a different tune, something that, in another context, might have been mistaken for a sad hymn. But there was no doubt that it was the final signal. Bolton's gaze snapped to Walder, and in that heartbeat, Cat saw the betrayal bloom. Crossbowmen started to raise their weapons from the rafters. Cat moved quickly, her heart pounding like thunder in her chest. She leapt to her feet and cried out in a loud voice, "Now!" Her voice soared over the din of the hall. For an instant, confusion rippled among the conspirators. Then the doors at either end of the great hall flew open, battered in by a force from outside. Men poured in, Northmen in stark livery, and among them the fearsome Great John Umber. Swords gleamed. Bolton's retinue whirled in shock, reaching for weapons they had not expected to need quite so soon. In the yard, Grey Wind's roar erupted as Robb's guards set him free. Chaos consumed the hall. Crossbow bolts rained down, but half of those in the rafters were cut down by hidden archers among the newly arrived Stark men. A swirling melee began near the dais. Walder Frye cried out in anger and panic, cursing. Edmure quickly pulled Rosalind down, covering her with his own body as men began slashing and stabbing. Bolton, eyes ablaze, darted away from the initial wave, his hand on the hilt of a dagger. Robb roared, "For the north!" as Grey Wind bounded in from the corridor, having slipped past frightened Frye guards. The direwolf tore into the nearest cluster of attackers. Screams resounded. Half the Freys fled for cover, and others tried to fight but found themselves cornered by the combined might of the Stark men and the Greatjon's furious charge. Walder Frey's expression contorted with terrified outrage. Catelyn seized a fallen spear from the floor, though she was no seasoned warrior. She brandished it at any Frye who came near. Her mind whirled. She had to find Bolton. That was the key. If Bolton escaped, he could cause havoc from the Dreadfort, perhaps strike from behind at the north. She needed him taken, alive or dead. She saw him slipping behind overturned tables in the chaos, his eyes scanning for a path of egress. She plunged into the fray. Swords flashed everywhere. She dodged a slash from a panicked Frye retainer. Men bellowed war cries or shrieked in pain. The stench of blood and spilled ale rose, thick in the air. Cat had been in battles before, but never in such an enclosed space, never in a swirl of fighting so disorienting. She pressed on, heart hammering. She saw Robb battling 3 Frye men, his sword a lethal arc in the torchlight. Grey Wind's growl rumbled. She glimpsed Brienne of Tarth, huge and unstoppable, plowing through foes to carve a path. Finally, Catelyn caught sight of Roose Bolton. He was making his way toward a side door, pushing aside any Frye who got in his way, knocking over a bench in the process. She followed, ignoring the rawness in her throat from shouting orders. With single-minded determination, she ducked under a spear thrust, plunged forward, and blocked Bolton's path with her own body. He paused, taking in the spear clutched in her trembling hands. Blood spattered his pale tunic, though he seemed uninjured. His expression remained maddeningly calm. Only the tension in his jaw hinted at the fury beneath. "Lady Stark," he said, the clamor of battle swirling around them. "I did not realize you had such a flair for the dramatic." Her chest heaved. "I heard the whisper of your knives, Lord Bolton. I won't let you butcher my son." For a moment, the corner of his mouth twitched. Then he lunged, drawing his dagger. Catelyn thrust with the spear. He dodged, sidestepping with surprising speed, and slashed at her arm. She felt pain flare, but the spear's length kept him from closing easily. They circled each other, onlookers lost in the background of the swirling chaos. Bolton struck again, aiming for her abdomen. She managed to deflect the blow with the spear's haft, though the force nearly jarred it from her hands. Her mind raced. She was no great fighter. Her best hope was to keep him at bay until someone stronger arrived. But Bolton's cunning showed in his footwork, his economy of motion. He waited for her to overextend, to make a mistake. It came too soon. She tried to jab at him, but her stance was poor. He locked the spear under his arm and wrenched it from her grasp with a smooth twist. Then his dagger flicked forward to claim her throat. She stumbled back, pain screaming through her wounded arm. Her thoughts a blur of "I cannot die here. I must protect Robb." Before the dagger found her flesh, a shadow loomed behind Bolton. Brienne of Tarth. In one crushing motion, the tall warrior slammed her armored forearm into Bolton's side, sending him staggering sideways. The dagger's tip cut a shallow line along Kat's collar, but did not go deeper. Kat gasped, hand going to her neck. Blood welled, but the cut was not mortal. Bolton spun, hissing, and slashed at Brienne. She parried with her long sword, the ring of steel on steel echoing. Bolton attempted a cunning feint, but Brienne's reflexes were honed by countless nights of practice. She hammered at him, forcing him to step back. His face betrayed no fear, yet it was clear he recognized the danger of facing an opponent as imposing as Brienne. With a sudden, desperate shift, Bolton tried to throw a table in her path. She crashed into it, stumbling, but did not fall. In that moment, Kat seized the chance. She scrambled for the fallen spear, ignoring the pain in her arm. Bolton was backing away toward a side door again. He might escape. If he did, everything they had worked for could crumble. Summoning her courage, she lunged forward, slashing the spearhead in a wide arc at his legs. It was more luck than skill that found its mark. Bolton miscalculated, focusing on Brienne. The spear bit into his thigh. He hissed in pain, staggering. Brienne surged forward, bringing her long sword down in a glimmering arc. He twisted to avoid a killing stroke, too late to dodge fully. Steel bit into his arm, drawing a spurt of blood. Now crippled in arm and leg, Bolton fell to a knee with a ragged gasp. His dagger slipped from his grip. Catelyn and Brienne closed in, weapons raised. The carnage around them continued, but here in this moment, time felt suspended. Bolton looked up at Kat, his normally placid features contorted in anger and cold malice. "You think you've won?" he spat. "Your illusions of victory, ephemeral. The Lannisters." His words ended with a sharp gasp as Brienne's gauntlet hand seized him by the collar. She forced him forward onto his stomach. Kat exhaled sharply, stepping back, her heart pounding. It would be so easy to ram the spear into his back and be done with it, but they needed him alive for Robb's sake. For the realm's sake, they needed to confirm the extent of his treachery. She pressed a foot on the dagger so he could not reclaim it. "Bind him," she told Brienne hoarsely. "Keep him from bleeding to death, but he must not escape." Brienne nodded, yanked a leather thong from her belt, and tightly lashed Bolton's hands behind him, ignoring his muted sounds of pain. Kat's mind spun, her breath coming in ragged bursts. The entire hall was a swirling battlefield, but the advantage clearly belonged to the Starks now. She could see that the crossbowmen had either been slain or pinned down by superior numbers. The Grachan's men fought fiercely, cornering the Frey defenders. Walder Frey's outraged screams echoed from the dais, where a ring of Stark soldiers closed in on him. She knelt beside Bolton, her wounded arm throbbing, blood still trickling from the cut at her collar. "Why did you betray us?" she demanded through clenched teeth. "If it was for the sake of power, you could have stood as regent in the north under Robb. Why slaughter your own liege lord's family?" Bolton bared his teeth in a half-grin, half-grimace. "Honor is a fool's prize. The Lannisters offered me more. Power, dominion. The Dreadfort has always chafed under the might of Winterfell. You never saw the knives I kept under my cloak? Poor Lady Stark. This was always coming." Kat felt her stomach twist with anger and revulsion. "So be it," she said curtly. "Brienne, take him away." Rising, she turned to see Robb approaching, blood staining his sword arm. He was alive, though, and the spark of relief nearly buckled her knees. Gray wind trotted at his side, muzzle dark with gore. Robb's eyes flicked between her wound and the sight of Bolton pinned on the ground. "Mother, are you?" "I'm fine," she managed. "He's in our custody." The thunder of conflict began to subside. The Freys were routed. A few of them had thrown down arms, others attempted to flee, but the Stark men forced them into corners. The Great John roared triumph, brandishing a bloodied axe. Lord Walder Frey was found cowering behind a table, screeching insults at his spawn for not defending him better. In short order, he was seized as well, a ring of sharp steel around his skinny neck. Edmure, disheveled but unhurt, emerged from beneath an overturned bench with Rosalind in tow. The bride looked pale and terrified, but relieved to see that Cat and Robb still lived. When the last pockets of resistance were quelled, silence settled in the great hall like dust after a storm. The tables were overturned, the floor slick with spilled wine and blood. Broken instruments lay scattered among corpses. The stench of death reeked. Cat gazed about in grim weariness. This had been a wedding feast turned into a battleground. Yet for once, the ambush had not consumed the Starks. The trap had been discovered and reversed, a serpentine betrayal undone by the watchful eyes of the mother wolf. Robb cleared his throat, drawing himself up despite the blood and exhaustion that clung to him. He addressed Walder Frey in a voice that shook with both anger and relief. "You aim to slaughter us under guest right?" he demanded. "I name you oathbreaker and traitor. You have conspired with your co-conspirator to murder your liege lords, to break bread and then stab your guests in the back. By the laws of gods and men, you deserve no mercy." Old Walder's watery eyes darted around. He licked his lips, voice trembling. It was Bolton's plan. He assured me that I would have the backing of the Lannisters. They said the king in the north was doomed anyway. We were only ensuring the best outcome for House Frey. You must see that. I'll pay compensation, gold, anything. Just spare my life." Robb's knuckles whitened around his sword hilt. Perhaps in another world, with different experiences, he might have found it in him to show mercy. But betrayal had followed betrayal, and he had endured enough. "You tried to kill my family," he spat. "I gave you a second chance to hold to your oath after I slighted you. You used it to plan our annihilation. I will not hear your pleas." He nodded to the Great John, who gave a savage grin. Before Walder could utter another shriek, Great John's axe came down, silencing him forever. The final clang of steel echoed in the hush. Catelyn closed her eyes. She felt no triumph, no delight in the old man's end. Only the cold necessity that such evil must be cut down or it would fester in the realm. Robb turned to Bolton, who knelt on the ground still, arms bound. A ring of Stark men surrounded him, wary of his cunning. Blood trickled from the wounds Cat and Brienne had dealt him. He stared back, his pale face set in stoic hatred. "Take him to the dungeons," Robb ordered, eyes hard. "He will face a full trial for his treachery before the Northern Lords and River Lords. Let all see how House Stark deals with betrayers." Bolton's lips twitched. He said nothing, but his eyes promised 1,000 curses. The men dragged him off. In the aftermath, the hall felt oddly hollow. The fight was done, but the cost was still being tallied. Cat noticed the bodies of Stark men who had fallen under crossbow bolts. The cost of saving Robb from betrayal had still been paid in blood. She found Edmure, who was trying to comfort Rosalind, still visibly trembling. The bride had seen her father and kin either slaughtered or captured. She had lost everything in an instant. Cat could not help but pity her. Edmure murmured soft reassurances that she would not be harmed, that she was his wife in truth, and he would shield her from any retribution. With an unsteady hand, Cat touched Rosalind's shoulder. "Your father's crimes are not yours," she said quietly. "My brother will protect you." Tears brimmed in the girl's eyes. She nodded, uncertain but grateful. Around them, men set to clearing the debris, tending the wounded, and putting out small fires that had sparked from overturned torches. The Great John boomed out commands, still flushed with triumph. Robb stood quietly near the dais, gray wind at his side, surveying the carnage. He seemed older than his years, weighed down by the knowledge that though they had avoided one horror, the realm was still at war. Catelyn approached her son. "Robb," she said gently, resting her hand on his uninjured arm. He turned to her, meeting her gaze. She saw relief in his eyes, but also sorrow. "We did it," he said, though there was little joy in his tone. "They meant to butcher us, and we turned it back on them." She squeezed his arm. "You saved House Stark from a dreadful fate. Your father would be proud." He managed a smile that did not fully warm his face. "It was you, Mother. Your vigilance, your willingness to suspect an ally. Without that, we'd have never known until the trap had already sprung." He looked across the hall to where Bolton had vanished. "I trusted Bolton. He fought beside me. I never imagined he could plan such horror." Catelyn glanced downward, fighting a sudden wave of exhaustion. "It is done. We cannot remain here. Once we've tended the wounded, we UST consider our next move." The phrase "who remain loyal will have no choice but to bend the knee or face your judgment." With Walder dead, Rosalind and Edmure stand as the future of this house. Robb nodded, brushing a strand of sweat-damp hair from his brow. "We'll root out any stragglers who still conspire with the Lannisters. The twins remain a strategic crossing, and we need it secure. Then I must march north. The Ironborn still hold Moat Cailin, and I have to reclaim the north." "Yes," Catelyn said. "Winterfell must be restored to you. If we truly hold Bolton as a prisoner, that leaves the Dread Fort uncertain. Perhaps we can isolate it, force it to capitulate. There are many steps yet ahead, my son." Some of the Stark men approached, seeking Robb's orders about patrolling the castle. Robb gave Cat a gentle nod, then turned to direct them. She stood still, the clang of weapons replaced by the groans of the wounded and the shuffle of men clearing bodies. The adrenaline of battle ebbed, leaving her arms trembling, her neck throbbing from the dagger's near miss. She closed her eyes, inhaling the sticky air. How many tragedies could one family endure? But at least this time, the tragedy had not claimed Robb. They had not repeated Ned's fate, nor the rumored slaughter of her younger sons. She had bought them a chance to keep the legacy of House Stark alive. Hours later, after the wounded had been tended and the dead accounted for, the survivors gathered in a smaller hall. It was not a celebration, there was too much blood for that, but it was an assembly to mark the victory they had won and the new predicament they faced. Edmure sat with Rosalind near a table, comforting her quietly. The great John hovered near Robb, who sat at the head of the table, shoulders weighed down by fatigue but eyes still alight with determination. Catelyn, as always, stood at her son's right hand. They spoke in hushed tones of the next steps. Food was brought, whatever rations could be found in the kitchens, which were in disarray. Many sipped ale or water in exhaustion. Cat noticed a few glances cast her way, nods of respect for the role she had played in exposing the conspiracy. She only nodded back, there was no triumph in her heart, only grim relief. They set watchers around the castle. Word would spread that Walder Frey was dead, that the wedding had resulted in a sudden battle. Some Freykin might try to rally in vengeance, but with the leadership decimated, it seemed unlikely. The crossing was in Stark hands for the time being. Robb's men barricaded the gates, and the Greyjoy's host circled outside, ready to repel any approach. Night came slowly. The wind rattled the towers. Cat found a small side chamber where she could wash the blood from her hands and bind the cut on her neck. A middle-aged maester from the Frey household tended her, presumably one of the few who had survived. He was trembling so hard she had to calm him to keep his hands steady. Then, left alone, she sank onto a wooden bench, letting her head fall forward into her hands. Images of the chaos haunted her. Crossbow bolts slicing the air, Walder Frey's final contorted scream, Roose Bolton's cold eyes. Above all, the knowledge that had they not discovered this treachery, the entire House Stark might have been extinguished in a single savage blow. She whispered a prayer to the Seven again, a prayer of gratitude this time, though she was not sure the gods listened. So much blood had stained this day, but at least her son lived. At least she had not lost another child. She heard a gentle knock on the door. Robb entered, wearily pushing back his hair. He carried a small tray with a steaming mug. "I brought you something hot to drink," he said softly. I needed to see how you fared." She managed a faint smile. "I'm well enough. Thank you, my son." He set the tray on a small table, pulled a stool over. They sat in weary companionship, mother and son, leaning toward each other in the lamplight. She sipped the concoction. Some mixture of wine and herbs, and warmth spread through her, loosening the knots of tension in her chest. "Have we truly won?" Robb asked in a hush. "This war is still raging. Tywin Lannister remains powerful. The Ironborn linger. We've staved off a disastrous ambush, but I feel as though we're only at the beginning of another climb." Catelyn reached out, covering his hand with hers. She recalled how tiny that hand once was, how small a babe he had been. Now he was a king with calloused palms. "We have prevented the worst blow. Roose Bolton's betrayal could have crippled us beyond hope. The North would have been left in turmoil, but we found him out in time. That alone is a great victory. As for the Lannisters, we still stand. That is more than they'd hoped for. Perhaps we can forge alliances anew. Our cause is battered, but alive. So long as we remain united, we have a chance to rebuild our strength and reclaim the North." Robb's eyes flickered with a faint spark. "For a time, I lost sight of hope. I lost it after I broke my word to Walder Frey by marrying Jane. I lost it when I executed Lord Karstark. I lost it again when the Ironborn seized so much of our homeland. But perhaps we still can carve a future, as Father would have wanted." Catelyn inhaled sharply. Tears stung her eyes at the mention of Ned, but she blinked them away. "Yes, we do what we must for the sake of the next generation. The old ways might crumble, the old alliances may fail us, but if we endure, that is enough." He squeezed her hand, then looked into the dim corridor beyond. "I should see to the men, check on our wounded. Send more instructions to the Great John about the castle's defenses." "You should," Catelyn agreed, though she placed a hand on his arm to keep him momentarily. "But promise me you'll rest soon. This day has been long, and we need a clear mind for what comes next." Robb smiled, tired but grateful for her concern. "I will, Mother." He rose and she watched him go, her heart aching with pride and fear. So young, forced to be so strong. Left alone again, she tried to let the simple presence of the lamp's glow and the warmth of the spiced wine lull her. But her mind strayed to the shape of the world beyond these walls. King's Landing, Tywin Lannister, the Iron Throne, Stannis Baratheon somewhere in the east, the Greyjoys in the north. They had 1,000 enemies, it seemed. One victory here would not unravel them all, but it might give them enough traction to stand and fight another day. In the days that followed, the twins were secured under Stark control, with Edmure Tully stepping in as the new lord on behalf of his bride. Rosalind Frey, timid and uncertain, was assured that she would face no repercussions for her father's sins. The few Freys who had survived and pledged fealty were allowed to remain, though carefully watched. Those who resisted were cast out or imprisoned. Bolton was kept in a tower cell under heavy guard, awaiting a reckoning before the Northern Lords. Word was sent out to loyal bannermen that the king in the north had foiled a great betrayal at the twins, an event that would soon be known among the small folk as the Reckoning of the Freys. Messengers rode out carrying the news far and wide. The effect was twofold. It showed that House Stark remained formidable, not to be trifled with. It also opened a path for new alliances, or so Cat hoped. If House Bolton had conspired with Walder Frey, who else might have been involved, silently waiting for the chance to devour them? The question gnawed at her. One late afternoon, as she gazed from a narrow window high in one of the twins' towers, she watched the waters of the Green Fork flow by, sparkling in the sun. A man's voice behind her broke her contemplation. She turned to see Brynden Blackfish Tully. Her uncle was battered but unharmed from the melee. He gave her a curt bow. "We've removed every corpse from the hall," he reported quietly. "Edmure is consoling his bride. The Great John is restless, eager to march. He has no taste for sitting behind walls, especially walls as grim as these." Catelyn nodded. "I suspect Robb feels the same. He is a man of action. The war calls him north." Blackfish studied her a moment. "Cat, you saved us all from that monstrous betrayal. There is talk among the men that you had the old god's favor, that your mother's intuition saved House Stark." She managed a thin smile. "I'm only a woman who refused to ignore her instincts. Those instincts have preserved the king in the north," he said simply. "Never doubt their worth. But be wary, Bolton's attempt may not be the last. There could be other threats coiled around us." She turned back to the window where the reflection of the sun on the water glinted like a blade. "I know, Uncle. We will stay vigilant. The realm has grown darker with each day of war." He rested a hand briefly on her shoulder, then withdrew. After he left, she lingered by the window, letting the breeze lift the loose strands of her hair. In her mind's eye, she saw once more that horrifying vision of crossbows pointed at her son, at Edmure, at all of them, if they had remained ignorant. She pictured Walder Frey cackling over their blood, Roose Bolton in his cold triumph. The magnitude of what could have been still made her shudder. Thank the gods for small mercies, she thought. For Brienne's vigilance, for the Greatjon's loyalty, for Robb's trust in her judgment. They were battered, but not broken. The king in the north would ride from the twins with an army still intact, his mother by his side, forging a new chapter in the war. With Bolton's treachery exposed and Walder's brood shattered, the twins would not become the grave of House Stark. Days passed. The castle's mood lightened marginally. Those loyal to the Starks busied themselves burying bodies, disposing of the traitors, and repairing any damage. Robb decided to depart for the north as soon as possible. leaving a small garrison behind to hold the twins. Edmure and Rosalind would remain temporarily, ensuring the crucial crossing stayed friendly to House Stark. The Great John, triumphant, declared he would ride at Robb's side until they reclaimed every holdfast in the north. On the morning they were to depart, Cat walked along the battlements. The sky was clear, the wind crisp. She spotted Brienne standing near one of the arrow slits, gazing at the horizon. The tall warrior turned as Cat approached, inclining her head respectfully. "How fares your arm, my lady?" Brienne asked, her earnest eyes flicking to the bandage. "It heals," Catelyn said. "Thanks to you, I kept my life. I owe you a debt greater than you know." Brienne frowned in her usual modest way. "I only did my duty, my lady. You have trusted me more than once. I won't fail you." Cat looked at the younger woman with gratitude. "You have not failed me, nor will you. Once Robb is marching north, I suspect you'll remain in his service or mine. Perhaps I'll need you still if I journey to seek my daughters. I cannot abandon them." Brienne's eyes gleamed with determination. "I swore an oath to bring your daughters back if I could. That oath remains unfulfilled, but I shall do everything in my power. Once we see the north secured, I'll go wherever you command." Catelyn smiled faintly and touched Brienne's armored arm in thanks. "One battle at a time. For now, we ride north with Robb and face whatever awaits us there." She left Brienne to her thoughts and continued around the battlements. She found her gaze drifting over the wide sweep of the countryside. The fields around the castle looked trampled, the roads churned by the recent arrivals. But the day was bright, the grasses swaying in the breeze. War was a monstrous force, but the land endured. Perhaps, in time, the realm might heal if the right people led it. They assembled in the courtyard not long after. The Great John boomed farewells to Edmure, slapping his back and teasing him about wedding joys. Rosalind stood at Edmure's side, uncertain but resolute enough to play her new role. Robb conferred with Blackfish on the disposition of the men. 50 were to remain, loyal Riverlanders mostly, to hold the castle. The rest would ride with Robb. Bolton was to be taken north as a prisoner, heavily guarded. The man's wounds were bound, but he had been placed in irons. He would see no mercy nor the light of day except through the bars of a cage. Cat lingered near Robb, watching the men lead Bolton out. Their one-time ally walked with a limp, gaze lowered, but she sensed his simmering hatred. Robb's jaw tightened as he regarded the traitor, though he kept his peace. The older knights forced Bolton onto a horse shackled to the saddle. They would take him to the north to face the justice of the northern lords. At last, with the sun climbing, Robb gave the order to move. The gates swung wide. Banners fluttered, the Stark dire wolf leading the column. Cat rode near her son, mindful of her throbbing arm but determined not to show weakness. Grey Wind loped alongside, throwing the occasional glare back at Bolton as if to warn him he was under the direwolf's watch. They crossed from the courtyard out into the open land. Cat cast a final glance over her shoulder at the twins. She saw men on the battlements wearing the Stark direwolf sigil, standing watch over the towers once so ominously held by House Frey. Now the castle was under Tully governance, a safe crossing for the king in the north. It was not a moment of joy, but it was certainly a moment of relief, a pivot away from the dreadful fate that could have befallen them. Their host spread out along the road, the Great John at the vanguard with a detachment of cavalry scouts. Robb rode in the central column, flanked by loyal knights. Cat found herself gazing at him, remembering how close she had come to losing him. The Red Wedding, that was how she had come to think of it from the fleeting glimpses in her nightmares. She had seen the hall awash in crimson, the savage betrayal. But they had defied that doom. They had changed fate by acting swiftly on a mother's instincts. Ahead stretched the path to the north. Reclaiming Moat Cailin, retaking Winterfell, forging alliances to fight the Lannisters. The world was still rife with threats. Even if they regained the north, the Iron Throne would not relinquish control easily. Yet at least they had a chance. The Bolton betrayal had been the sort of blow from which many a kingdom would never recover. But they had survived, bloody but unbroken. Catelyn let the horse's steady gait soothe her jangled nerves. She felt the wind on her face, tasting dust and the tang of the road. Robb steered his mount closer to hers, speaking in a low voice. "We'll make camp well before nightfall," he said. "Then I'll want to send outriders ahead to scout the route north. I suspect the Lannisters will be busy defending King's Landing from Stannis, but we should not underestimate them." She agreed quietly. "Nor the Greyjoys. but one step at a time. He nodded, almost smiling. One step at a time. They rode onward, their company forging ahead through farmland and rolling hills. The morning light glinted off their armor, painting the scene in harsh brilliance. In the days and months to come, the legends would circle around how the Starks turned the tables at the twins. Some would call it the Wolf's salvation. Others would spin twisted rumors that the Starks had attacked Walder Frey unprovoked. But Cat did not care for the rumors. She only cared that her son was alive, that Bolton's dagger had failed, and that House Stark still stood against the rising storms. As the distance grew between the host and the castle behind them, she couldn't help but reflect on the swirling coil of events that had led them here. The quiet nights of gathering information, the glimpses of men in shadowed corridors, Brienne's tracking of Bolton's messenger. All culminating in that single, desperate hour when they had seized the initiative at what was meant to be a slaughter. She shivered, remembering the ring of crossbows overhead. They had been so close to catastrophe. But no tragedy had manifested, no red wedding, no extinguishing of the Stark line. Instead, Walder Frey was dead by their hands, Roose Bolton taken prisoner, and the path forward, while fraught, was open. In the swirl of the unending war, that counted as a precious reprieve. Morning turned to afternoon as the company traveled. Catelyn allowed her mind a rare indulgence, imagining a future where they might reclaim Winterfell, seat Robb upon its ancient throne, and find a way to rescue Sansa and Arya. The dream felt fragile, like a half-formed rainbow after a storm, but it was more than she had dared to dream weeks before. They had turned aside the dagger aimed at their hearts. Now they had to weather the rest of the storms. She sighed and looked at Robb, the weight of her love for him filling her chest. Ned's legacy lived in him, burned in him, and in moments she saw Ned's features etched onto Robb's face, especially in that determined set of the jaw. No matter what else the Lannisters or the world tried to do, they would not douse that flame, not while she still drew breath. They pressed north, riding through the day until at last they found a defensible spot near the banks of the Green Fork to make camp. Tents sprang up. Scouts were dispatched. Men built fires. The Great John bragged and boasted about the next victories they would snatch. Cat wandered among the fires, ignoring the ache in her shoulder and neck, offering a kind word here and there to the soldiers. She was Lady Catelyn Stark, widow of Ned, mother of the king in the north. Many men looked to her for reassurance that they had done the right thing, that the war might still be won. She gave them what comfort she could, though in her private thoughts, she recognized that the road ahead remained perilous. That evening, she shared a campfire with Brienne and a few loyal bannermen. They spoke quietly of their plans, the next steps in the campaign. Brienne asked Cat if she had any tasks needed of her. For the moment, Cat said, "Remain near me. I would trust no one else to guard my life or my sons more loyally. When we reach the north, if we have the chance, we'll see about searching for my daughters." Brienne nodded, resolute. "I am yours to command, my lady." Hours later, Cat returned to the tent she shared with Robb, as had become their custom on campaign, separate sleeping areas but joined by a thin partition so she could be near if news arrived in the night. Sleep came grudgingly. She tossed in her bedroll, haunted by the images of the battle. She almost found herself expecting crossbow bolts to tear through the canvas. It would be some time, she suspected, before she could let go of that fear. But if fear was the price of saving her son, she would pay it gladly. She recalled Ned's words from years ago in the comfort of Winterfell's Godwood, "A mother's heart is a fierce thing. It can protect or it can break the world." She had never quite understood what he meant until now. Love had made her fierce, had given her the strength to unearth Bolton's betrayal. It might still break the world before it was over, but at least she had a chance to set it right. Night deepened, the campfires burned low. Somewhere in the darkness, a horse whickered and a sentry called out. The swirl of wind rustled the grass. Cat closed her eyes, letting that gentle lull wash over her. Tomorrow, they would ride again, forging north. Tomorrow, she would continue to stand by Robb's side. Tomorrow, the war would rage. But for this night, at least, the immediate threat was defeat. As she drifted into uneasy dreams, she clung to one simple thought. We survived. The Red Wedding never came to pass. Her family still lived. And so long as they drew breath, there was hope that a Stark might yet endure the winter and emerge into spring. She would fight, and she would protect, and she would wield whatever cunning she possessed. The mother wolf had tasted the copper tang of near defeat, and had howled in defiance. No matter what trials remained, Catelyn Stark would not allow any more of her children to be stolen from her. She had turned the tables at the twins. Now, let the realm tremble at the knowledge that the wolves were not so easily slaughtered in their den. The next day's dawn found her sitting upright, spear in hand, the small wound at her collar bound, and steel in her eyes. And she stood ready, unbroken, for all that yet lay ahead. Catelyn awakened to the sound of the wind rattling the canvas overhead. For a moment, in that liminal place between dreams and waking, she wondered whether she was still at the twins, ensnared in a nightmare of clashing steel and treacherous crossbowmen. But as she opened her eyes, she saw only the faint morning light filtering through the seams of the tent. The air smelled of damp earth and horse sweat, tinged with the savory whiff of someone's breakfast fire. Outside, she heard the low drone of voices, the occasional clang of metal. Her body felt stiff, her wounded arm a dull ache beneath its bandage. She sat up, brushing back tangled hair. There was no plush bed, only a bedroll on hard ground, but she was used to that now. Her mind traveled to the place where relief and dread intertwined. They had escaped the nightmare at the twins by acting first, capturing Roose Bolton, slaying Walder Frye in his own hall, and shattering the carefully laid trap meant to butcher House Stark. But the memory of that blood-soaked feast still lingered, and though they had survived, the war raged on, with new perils waiting. Even in victory, her heart could find no true peace. She rose, slipped into her boots, and drew her cloak around her shoulders. Outside, the camp stretched across a gently sloping field near the Green Fork. Tents of mottled green and brown dotted the landscape, smoke curling from hastily dug fire pits. In the distance, the river wound through patches of thin woodland before bending northward, reflecting the pale sky. The men who followed the king in the north had grown accustomed to breaking camp quickly. They expected to ride again soon after sunrise. Some were already dismantling their tents, while others hunched around fires for a last mouthful of bread or salt fish. Catelyn made her way through the camp, exchanging nods with guardsmen and bannermen as she passed. Many gazed at her with renewed respect. She had been the one to sense Bolton's treachery well before it struck, and word of that had passed from mouth to mouth. She offered them only quiet greetings, mindful of how drastically the tide might have turned if her suspicions had been ignored. War had taught her that chance could be a cruel master, and she felt no triumph in the death they had wrought at the twins, only relief that Robb still lived. She found her son outside the largest tent in the camp, conversing with Great John Umber, who towered over him and punctuated every other sentence with a booming laugh. Robb looked older than his years, his jaw set in a determined line, his hair in need of a trim. Even Grey Wind, who prowled close by, seemed subdued in the morning quiet. Catelyn waited for a pause in their conversation before speaking. Robb turned at her approach, a slight smile softening his expression. "Mother," he said, "did you sleep?" "Well enough," she replied, "though I doubt I will ever get used to waking on the ground." She nodded to the Great John, who inclined his shaggy head in greeting. "And you?" Robb exhaled. "I've had heavier thoughts, to put it mildly. The men are ready to march soon. We'd best see to the day's business." Catelyn studied his face. She could see the lines of worry beneath the veneer of command. The war had worn him thin. "And Bolton?" she asked softly. A flicker of anger crossed Robb's eyes. "Alive. Chained. My guards check him every hour. He's to ride with us all the way north. Once we hold a gathering of northern lords, we'll put him on trial for high treason. He'll have no easy death if the tales of his betrayal spread far and wide. But I need him alive for now to confirm the extent of his conspiracies." He paused. "I hate the notion of carrying him along, but I see no better way." Catelyn recalled Roose Bolton's chilling gaze, how his voice had seemed so gentle when he spoke of betrayal and power. "Yes," she said, forcing steadiness into her words. "Keep him under guard. We may learn more of who else stands arrayed against us. Better we hold him prisoner than wonder if a hidden viper still lurks in our midst." The Great John rumbled his agreement. "Aye, best to keep that pale-faced cur alive till we're in the north. Then hang him from the highest tree, or let him feed the crows from the walls of Winterfell if it comes to that. He might squeal first, naming the rest of his co-conspirators." The thought of Bolton squealing seemed too neat an image for a man of such icy composure, but Catelyn said nothing. She glanced around. "We should see to our wounded as well." Robb jerked his chin toward a cluster of tents nearer the river. "Maester Vyman has them in hand. We lost fewer men at the twins than I feared, but every life weighs on me." Her heart twisted at that. Robb carried the burden of each loss, even as he carried the burden of kingship. "I'll pay them a visit," she said gently. "Where do we ride this day?" "North," Robb replied. We're heading through the rougher terrain along the Green Fork, then veering west to take the roads that lead us eventually toward Moat Catelyn. The Ironborn still hold it, so we'll have to unseat them if we're to return home in force." The Grey John let out a bark of enthusiasm. "Nothing I relish more than throwing those squids back into the sea. We'll smash your grace. We'll take Moat Catelyn for the north." Catelyn forced a small smile. The very idea of leaving the Riverlands for the north felt like a dream turned harsh necessity. She'd never imagined a day would come when she would set aside thoughts of Riverrun's safety to focus so intently on reclaiming Winterfell. But with Edmure left at the Twins and the Lannisters seemingly occupied elsewhere, it seemed the only course. She left Robb and the Grey John to their planning, pausing briefly to scratch Grey Wind's ear. The direwolf's luminous eyes flicked to her in mild approval, as though he, too, understood the significance of the battles yet to come. Then she went about her own tasks. She visited the wounded men who lay in bedrolls or on stretchers, some moaning softly while the maester's aides applied poultices to arrow wounds or stitched gashes. She moved quietly among them, offering a word of comfort here and there, remembering their faces from the nights around the campfires. Some had once been freeriders, some bannermen, some small folk pressed into service. All had bled to keep the king in the north alive. When she finished, she checked on her own bandage, stiff with dried blood, though the cut on her collar was shallow, and changed into a cleaner tunic. Outside, the camp was stirring into a hustle as men packed their kit, saddled horses, rolled up tents. The morning sun burned off the night's chill. She saw Brienne of Tarth unsmiling in her mail, helping a younger guard feed and water the horses. Though her presence was often enough to make men stare, none could doubt her dedication or her prowess after the chaos of the Twins. More than once, Catelyn had heard the men murmur about how Brienne and the Lady Stark had together cornered Bolton. The rumors magnified certain details, but the core truth remained: Brienne was as loyal a blade as any among Robb's host. The short spring day wore on as they broke camp and marched. Catelyn rode near Robb in the column's center, with Bolton in chains somewhere behind them, flanked by 4 guards at all times. The roads were half-churned into mud, rutted with wagon tracks. Overhead, the sky promised fair weather, but none could mistake the underlying gloom that came from years of war. Fields lay blackened on either side, and a few half-burned farmsteads stood silent, their owners fled or dead. When they encountered small folk, the people watched from hiding or ran away. Trust was scarce in the war-torn Riverlands. By midday, they paused near a shallow stream to water the horses. Robb's scouts spread out, scanning for any sign of Lannister outriders or bandits. The Great John complained loudly that they needed a real fight soon to keep the men eager. Robb gave him a wry look. "Let's not conjure foes if we can avoid them. I'd like to reach the neck without another pitched battle if it can be managed." But they all knew that even if Lannister forces were absent, the realm was full of threats. The smaller camps of brigands, the holdouts from disloyal or uncertain lords. Catelyn felt the tension thrumming in the men. The war had taught them to be cautious even while it hardened them. This was no gallant march to glory, but a slow trek homeward through ravaged lands. That night, they made camp in a hollow ringed by sparse trees. Catelyn again found herself in the company of Brienne, 2 of her loyal Riverrun men, and a few of the Greyjohn's sworn swords. They shared a small fire, passing around hard bread, salt pork, and watered wine. The talk turned, inevitably, to the next steps in the campaign, retaking Moat Catelyn from the Ironborn, pressing on to Winterfell, dealing with the ravages that the Greyjoys had inflicted upon the north. "Those iron devils," growled one of the Greyjohn's men, a scarred fellow named Torgon. "They're worse than the Lannisters in some ways. At least the Lions have reason to fear the king in the north on land. These Ironborn slink away by sea, come back when they please, burn what they can. They won't hold the neck for long," Brienne said in her husky voice. "Not if the king in the north marches with all these men. Moat Catelyn's walls can be formidable, but the Ironborn don't have the numbers or supply lines." Catelyn listened quietly, arms folded beneath her cloak. She wondered if Theon Greyjoy was still among them. Theon had betrayed Robb as well, seizing Winterfell with a small force. Then came rumors that Ramsay Snow, Roose Bolton's bastard, had turned on Theon, burning the castle and capturing him. No one seemed to know the truth of that. But the result was the same: Winterfell reduced to charred stones, the north in chaos, and many of their lesser holdfasts under Ironborn dominion. She shuddered at the thought of how her younger sons might have died there, though in truth, she still prayed that Bran and Rickon had escaped. Rumors abounded, yet no proof existed. War devoured all certainty. Her mind shifted to the plight of her daughters. Sansa was a hostage in King's Landing, as far as she knew, still betrothed or perhaps wed to some Lannister scheme. And Arya, lost. Rumors placed her wandering the riverlands or dead at the Twins or held by the Brotherhood without banners. The not knowing was a constant ache. She swallowed hard. She told herself that if there was a chance to rescue them, she would take it. But first, they had to secure the North. They could not keep splintering their already worn-down forces. In the flickering firelight, the men's banter drifted to other subjects, mostly lighter. She withdrew from them, lost in her own thoughts, and eventually made her way back to her tent. She laid down on her bedroll, listening to the wind rustle the canvas. A part of her worried that an enemy might descend out of the darkness, but their perimeter was set, and loyal watchers ringed the camp. The day's long ride weighed on her. Sleep wrapped her in uneasy dreams of crossbows and pale eyes glaring behind a freckled face. They rose early the next day, continuing north. The days that followed blurred into a rhythm of trudging across war-torn roads, skirting villages abandoned or half-ruined, fording streams whose bridges had been destroyed by one army or another. Now and then, they encountered pockets of refugees, small folk with carts full of rags and starving children. Robb ordered that they be given safe passage, and in some cases a pittance of food. Yet the army could scarcely support itself, let alone feed half the broken realm. As they pressed north, the trees grew thicker, the wetlands and marshy grounds of the neck not far away. Rain fell fitfully on more than one occasion, turning the roads into quagmires that bogged down the wagons. Catelyn spotted a few will-o'-the-wisp lights hovering in the distance during one foggy twilight, but they were likely just swampy mists. Still, the men muttered about marsh kings and bog devils. The north could feel like a different world, hostile to all but those who knew its ways. Scouts brought back word that Moat Cailin was indeed garrisoned by Ironborn. Their banners were spotted on the crumbling towers, and watchers guarded the causeway that led through the swampy territory. A few outriders had glimpsed perhaps 100 or more Ironborn, though none had ventured too close. The approach to Moat Cailin was always treacherous. There were only certain paths through the bog that would not swallow a man and his horse. If the Ironborn held those choke points, they could make an advance costly. Yet Robb had well over 3,000 men, and the Greatjon's ferocity was hardly in doubt. They halted in a stretch of high ground about a league from Moat Cailin. There, Robb convened his key captains, among them the Greatjon, Lord Galbart Glover, who had recently joined them with a small retinue of men, Rickard Riswell's nephew, and a few other northern loyalists who had straggled south. Catelyn stood at the edge of the gathering, mindful that she did not command as a knight or lord might, yet Robb always valued her counsel. "Our scouts say they've maybe 100 men," Robb told the circle, "and some thralls to do their labor. The walls are ruins in many places, but the central tower remains strong enough to serve as a keep. The causeway leading up to Moat Cailin is narrow, forced between bogs on either side. The Ironborn rely on those conditions to funnel us into a single choke point." The Greatjon gave a dismissive wave. "We have thousands. We charge up the causeway with shield and spear, we overrun them, done." "Easier said than done," Galbart Glover countered. "A handful of men can hold the causeway if they have archers. We risk losing many good soldiers to a hail of arrows or thralls with scorpions, who knows?" Catelyn remembered the stories of Moat Cailin from childhood. It was said that once, a handful of Northmen had defended it against many times their number, stalling the Undul invasions. "Could we approach from multiple angles, or is the terrain too treacherous?" she asked quietly. Robb nodded at her. "We have a few guided paths from local Crannogmen loyal to House Reed, I hope. They might help us circumvent the main causeway. If we can send small groups around to the flank, we might attack from 3 directions at once, cutting off the Ironborn's escape and preventing them from focusing all their strength on the causeway." Galbart Glover rubbed his beard. "I prefer that to a brute force assault. I can take a detachment of my men on one of these smaller paths if the Crannogmen can guide us. We'd need someone else to lead a second flanking force." The Greatjon snorted. "If you're heading around through the muck, don't look at me. I'm too big for sneaking. I'll lead the main causeway assault. That's more my style." A faint grin passed over Robb's lips. "As you wish. That leaves a second flanking group. Lord Riswell's nephew has volunteered. We also have Brienne of Tarth, who might join one of the flanking forces as an added sword." Catelyn's ears pricked. She wondered if she ought to join the flanking force. But in truth, she was neither stealthy nor a battlefield commander. She would be a liability in an unseen approach. Better she remain with Robb or else stay behind the lines. How soon will we move, she asked. Tomorrow, Robb decided. Our scouts will return with final details from the Crannogmen. At dawn, the Greyjohn will begin his push up the causeway, drawing the Ironborn's attention. Then, once they engage, Glover and Ryswell's men will appear from the sides. If it goes well, we'll overwhelm them quickly. Thus settled, the council broke. The rest of the day passed intense preparation. Men checked their weapons, sharpened swords, prepared siege equipment, though Moat Caelin's half-ruined walls would likely fall to a determined assault. Catelyn oversaw some of the logistical elements, ensuring that the wounded and baggage stayed well out of harm's way. She noticed a hush in the camp that evening, the hush of men bracing for a fight. The thought of an assault weighed on everyone's mind, especially as the bogs offered no easy retreat. Night descended, filled with the chirr of unseen swamp insects. Fires dotted the camp in subdued clusters. Catelyn walked among them, giving what reassurance she could. She passed the tent where Roose Bolton was held. He and a couple of his men likewise captured at the Twins. The guards were posted in a ring, grim-faced. She did not enter. She had no desire to see that pallid face, hear that oily voice. But she paused briefly, hearing the faint shuffle of chains within, perhaps Bolton shifting in the darkness. Good, she thought. Let him contemplate how his betrayal ended here, in captivity and disgrace, while House Stark marched onward. She found Robb near his own tent, gray wind resting at the entrance. He was alone, gazing at the dark silhouette of the distant towers of Moat Cailin. The faint moonlight traced the ruinous shape. She joined him in silence, studying the place that had once been the southern sentinel of the north. Even in ruins, Moat Cailin was a formidable choke point. If the Ironborn used it cleverly, they might inflict terrible losses. At length, Robb said, I used to hear stories of Moat Cailin when I was a boy in Winterfell. They said it was older than the first men and that any southern invader who tried to cross the neck would come to grief at these ruins. Now we're the invaders, in a sense, returning home by force. But the north belongs to House Stark, Catelyn said, though softly. You aren't the invader, Robb. You're the rightful king in the north reclaiming your land. His shoulders tensed. I only wish Father were here to see it done properly. He would have found a more peaceful way, perhaps. But the Ironborn, they don't heed negotiations. Catelyn laid a hand on his arm. Your father would understand necessity. We do what we must. She hesitated, then ventured, has there been any word of Theon Greyjoy among them? A flicker of regret passed through Robb's expression. Some say he's not there. Theon was captured by the bastard of Bolton, or so the rumors go. Maybe he's dead or somewhere else. I don't know. The men who watch from afar see no sign of him. It's just another piece of the puzzle that we'll uncover in time. She nodded, uncertain how she felt about Theon's fate. He had grown up with them almost like a ward brother, but had turned cloak, attacking Winterfell. If he was indeed captured by Bolton's bastard, that would be a cruel fate, even for Theon. She pushed the thought aside. More pressing tasks waited. Try to SD, Robb, she urged. The men will look to you tomorrow, and they need your clarity. I'll try, he said, managing a faint, wan smile. You as well, Mother. The next day dawned gray and humid. A hazy fog clung to the marshes, obscuring the horizon. Scouts returned before sunrise, bringing word that the Crannogmen had arrived to guide the flank groups. As the soldiers roused, strapping on armor and cloaks, voices carried low in the clammy air. The Greyjohn's grin was as wide as ever, for he relished a frontal assault. Glover and Ryswell's nephew conferred with thin, wiry Crannogmen sporting leather jerkins and frog spears. The plan unfolded swiftly. Catelyn stood beside Robb as the men formed up. The largest contingent, nearly 1,000 strong, massed behind the Greyjohn. They would march up the main causeway, presenting a clear, noisy threat. Meanwhile, two smaller columns, each a few hundred, would vanish into the bog on either side, guided by the Crannogmen's knowledge of safe trails. Once the fight began, they would emerge to fall upon the Ironborn from flanking positions, hopefully forcing a swift surrender. Catelyn herself would remain with Robb's protective detail, near enough to oversee the battlefield, but not at the front lines. Many times had she felt uneasy being so close to a fight. Yet she had no wish to cower far behind. If something unexpected happened, if the Ironborn had more men than they believed, or if the swamp trails turned treacherous, she wanted to be near Robb to lend her counsel if needed. It was no easy compromise, but one she had learned to accept in the swirl of war. The Greyjohn bellowed for the men to move. Trumpets sounded thinly in the damp air. Banners stirred, though the humidity weighed them down. The causeway stretched out like a dark ribbon through the bog, leading to the looming shapes of Moat Cailin's battered towers. They marched. The bog seemed to swallow sound. For a while, all Catelyn could hear was the squelch of boots and hooves, the occasional clink of armor. Overhead, clouds pressed low, threatening drizzle. From time to time, she glimpsed dark shapes flitting among the reeds, likely Crannogman scouts or small swamp animals startled by the large host. As they closed within arrow range of Moat Cailin, the Ironborn made their presence known. A horn's call echoed from the broken ramparts, and a ragged banner bearing the kraken of House Greyjoy rose in defiance. Then came the hiss of arrows. A few men cried out, dropping to the causeway. The Greyjohn roared, raising his shield. The vanguard advanced, returning fire with longbows. Catelyn could see Ironborn archers taking cover behind toppled stones and parapets. The fight had begun. Robb signaled for his portion of the host, some 500 men, to hold position momentarily, waiting for the flankers to position themselves. She could sense his tension. Every moment they lingered gave the Ironborn more opportunity to rain arrows. Already, the Greyjohn's men were struggling to move forward under a hail of shafts. But soon enough, a hail of answering arrows came from the left flank, shot from among the reeds. Glover's contingent had arrived. The distant shouts and clamor suggested Ryswell's group was coming in from the right. The Ironborn realized too late that they were being squeezed from multiple angles. "Forward," Robb said. They advanced carefully, shields raised against stray arrows. Catelyn forced herself to remain calm even as she saw men in stark colors toppling into the bog, some thrashing in murky water, others silent from arrow wounds. War was always savage, but there was a ferocity to the Ironborn that made it especially brutal. They fought to hold whatever they seized, to reave and pillage. For them, Moat Cailin was a proud prize. They would not yield easily. Yet the combined might of the North pressed in. The Greyjohn's vanguard slammed into the crumbling gate of the main tower, shields locked, pikes bristling. Ironborn defenders met them with axes and spears. Glover's men climbed over fallen rubble, harrying the defenders from the flank. Ryswell's men struck from the opposite side, driving Ironborn archers from their vantage. Catelyn heard the clash of steel, the screams of the wounded, the barked commands in half a dozen voices. Smoke rose from somewhere amid the debris. Someone had set fire to an outbuilding or a wooden barricade. The acrid smell of burning swamp grass drifted in the air. She stayed near Robb, who directed the battle from a position of relative shelter behind an upthrust of collapsed stone. He had a handful of knights from the Riverlands with him, along with Grey Wind, who paced restlessly, ears laid back at the sounds of bloodshed. A messenger ran up, breathless, to report that the left flank was making progress. Several Ironborn had retreated deeper into the structure. Another messenger arrived to say that the right flank was pinned by fierce resistance. Robb quickly dispatched reinforcements from the main group. Moments later, a horn blast sounded, and Catelyn saw a group of Ironborn break from the central tower, attempting to flee north across the bog. But the Crannogmen were waiting, emerging from hidden vantage points. In short order, the Ironborn found themselves surrounded. Some flung down weapons, preferring captivity to a watery grave in the swamps. Others fought to the death. She watched an Ironborn with a Reaver's tattoo on his face swing a huge axe at two of Glover's men before being brought down by arrows. The bog churned red with blood. Gradually, the fury subsided. The Greyjohn's roar echoed from within the ruins, proclaiming victory. Robb signaled in advance, moving into the heart of Moat Cailin, where the battered walls still offered partial cover. Catelyn followed, stepping over fallen stones, muddy ground, and more than one dead body. The day's gloom pressed down, and the stench of gore mingled with swamp rot. She wished she could spare her men from more violence, but the war offered no such mercy. Inside what remained of the main tower, she found the Greyjohn leaning on a shattered piece of masonry, his armor flecked with blood, his broad chest heaving. "They're broken," he declared, waving his axe. "Not many left to fight. Some Ironborn tried to hold the second floor, but we scattered them. Half surrendered, half died." Robb surveyed the carnage, face grim. "Well done," he said to the Greyjohn and the men. "Gather the prisoners. Ensure they're disarmed. We'll see if any are highborn enough to ransom. The rest can rot in our dungeons or serve as thralls cleaning up this place." Catelyn walked carefully among the rubble. The walls that once rose tall were collapsed, revealing jagged edges open to the sky. A makeshift wooden staircase led up to a half-intact walkway, where Ironborn archers had once stood. Below, a courtyard lay littered with broken stone, pitch-dark puddles of stagnant water, and fresh corpses. She saw Glover's banner, mud-stained but upright, and men of House Riswell dousing small fires. The Greyjohn's men herded the Ironborn prisoners, a ragged group of about 30, into a corner where they were made to kneel. One among them, a broad-shouldered man with salt and pepper hair and a scar across his lip, called out, "I am Harrag Pike, captain of the Iron Shark. Who commands here?" Robb stepped forward, gray wind at his side. The presence of the direwolf drew a hiss of apprehension from some of the kneeling Ironborn. "I am Robb Stark," he said, "King in the North. You and your men are my prisoners." A flicker of calculation passed over Harrag Pike's face. "King in the North, is it? And you'll be wanting Moat Cailin back. Well, you've spilled enough of our blood to claim it." Robb's gaze was unyielding. "You took what was not yours. Now you'll answer for it. Any man among you who yields shall live, for now. But you will not run free." Harrag gave a curt nod. "We've no illusions otherwise. Will you ransom us? Or keep us locked in chains?" "That depends on whether you're worth a ransom," Robb said. "If you're not, you'll remain a prisoner until the war ends. Assuming you don't try to cross me." The Ironborn sank into resentful silence. Robb signaled for the guards to bind the prisoners. Meanwhile, men began shouting and rummaging through the wreckage, taking stock of what meager supplies the Ironborn had left behind. Barrels of salted fish, a few casks of cheap ale, ragged bedrolls. It was evident the Reavers had lived here only minimally, enough to hold the crossing. Catelyn felt a surge of grim satisfaction at seeing the Kraken banner torn down, replaced by the direwolf. Word of the victory spread swiftly. A ragged cheer rose from the men. The cost in lives was not light. Dozens of Stark warriors lay among the dead. But the strategic significance was enormous. Holding Moat Cailin meant House Stark could more easily move troops in and out of the north. No more Ironborn would plague the neck from here. A measure of pride lit Robb's voice when he ordered the direwolf banner flown from the tallest surviving tower. They spent the rest of the day securing the ruins, mopping up scattered pockets of resistance, and searching for hidden supply caches or traps. A few bodies had to be dragged from half-flooded cellars. More than once, Catelyn heard men cursing the swamp, cursing the Ironborn, cursing the ruin itself, which seemed haunted by its ancient ghosts. By dusk, Moat Cailin was fully under Stark control. Torches flickered in the courtyard as the victors dined on whatever rations they could find. Smoke from small cookfires curled into the twilight sky. Robb gathered his commanders in what had once been a keep's great hall, now open to the elements and strewn with rubble. They lit a ring of lanterns around a makeshift table. Rain threatened overhead, so they huddled beneath a section of roof still partially intact. Catelyn joined them, standing close to Robb so she could catch every word. "We hold Moat Cailin," Robb began. He cast his gaze around the circle. Galbart Glover, the great John Riswell's nephew, a few other northern captains. Brienne stood slightly apart, arms crossed. "I'll leave a strong garrison here to secure the crossing. We can't risk losing it again. The question is who commands it, and how many men we can spare." Galbart Glover bowed his head. "I'll stay, if you wish it, your grace. Someone with local ties should hold the place, and I can bring in more men from Deepwood Mott once the roads are safe." "Aye," the great John said, "but we also need your men up north if we're to reclaim Winterfell. There's a question of balance." Catelyn listened as they debated. Eventually, they agreed that Galbart Glover would remain at Moat Cailin with around 500 men, plus a small contingent of crannogmen who knew the swamps. The rest of the host, including the Greyjohn's large force, would press on northward toward Winterfell. Once the seat of House Stark was reclaimed and stable, Glover could send men from Moat Cailin to join them. That settled, Robb turned to more personal matters. "We've heard no sign of Theon Greyjoy here. If he's alive, he's not in the hands of these Ironborn. Bolton's bastard may still hold him somewhere else. I doubt that man would be foolish enough to remain in the Dreadfort now that his father is our prisoner. But we must be wary." One of the captains asked, "What of the bastard of Bolton himself? Is he not likely to hold the Dreadfort?" Robb's lips thinned. "He might, but once we free the north, we'll see about that. We'll require the help of other loyal houses. Manderley, Serwyn, Tallheart, and the rest. We'll root out all Boltons if they've turned traitor. With Roose himself in chains, their power is hobbled. The men nodded in agreement. But there was a tension in the air, a recognition that the process might not be so simple. The north was vast and large swaths had been destabilized by the war. The Ironborn raids on the coasts, the betrayal by the Boltons, the uncertain fates of lesser houses. It would take time and blood to re-establish Stark authority in every corner. In the aftermath of the meeting, Catelyn found herself slipping out into the courtyard. The night air was heavy with moisture, and the remnants of the day's violence clung to every stone. She paused near a broken archway, gazing up at the half-moon behind drifting clouds. Footsteps approached, and she looked over to see Brienne of Tarth, tall and broad-shouldered, her face shadowed by lantern light. "My lady," Brienne said quietly, "are you well?" "I am only remembering," Catelyn replied. "I once stood on these very stones as a girl. My father brought me south to visit our bannermen, and we passed by Moat Cailin. It was in better shape then, though still a ruin. I never imagined I would one day see it retaken in war." Brienne nodded, her expression thoughtful. "War changes what we think impossible." Catelyn studied her face in the dim glow. Despite the bloodshed they had witnessed, Brienne still carried that earnestness in her eyes. "I will never stop being grateful for what you did at the Twins, Brienne. You saved me from Bolton's dagger. Saved my son, in part, by stopping that traitor from fleeing. I hope I can repay you one day, but I do not know how." Brienne shook her head vehemently. "I require no repayment, my lady. You showed me kindness when no one else would. You gave me a chance to honor my vow to protect you and your daughters. If I can continue to serve, I shall." Catelyn's throat tightened. She reached out and gripped Brienne's hand for a moment. "Then stay by my side. I suspect we'll face more dangers as we move deeper into the north." Brienne gave a short bow. "As you command." When morning dawned, the battered fortress of Moat Cailin bustled with the reorganization of forces. Some men constructed crude barricades at the half-collapsed gates while others prepared to march. Galbart Glover and his assigned 500 took charge of the place, ensuring the Ironborn prisoners were secured. Harag Pike remained sullen and uncooperative, but the promise of a possible ransom kept him from doing anything suicidal. Robb's main host, numbering around 2,000 men now, formed ranks on the causeway, direwolf banners rippling in a light wind that brought the dank smell of the swamp. They had lost men to the assault, and more had been left behind to guard the Twins or Riverrun, but the force was still substantial enough, it was hoped, to reclaim Winterfell from whatever stragglers or usurpers remained. Catelyn rode near Robb, Grey Wind at their flank, and the Great John bellowed orders to hurry stragglers along. The crossing of the neck continued in earnest. The bogs gradually gave way to more solid ground, the thick stands of pine and fir that marked the southern stretches of the north. The men breathed easier once the watery hazards lay behind them, though the temperature grew crisper by the day. No snows had yet come. This was the tail end of the warmer season, but winter loomed on the horizon, an ever-present threat in the north. Catelyn's heart beat faster with each league traveled. The land here felt familiar, even under the pall of war. She passed stands of ancient trees that reminded her of childhood rides with her father and siblings, though that had been in the Riverlands. Still, the hush of northern forests made her think of the times she'd visited Winterfell with Ned. She recalled the smell of the godwood, the quiet presence of the old weirwood by its pool. Would they find Winterfell in ashes, or was there a chance the stones still stood firm? On the third day north of Moat Cailin, they encountered refugees coming the opposite way, small folk with carts heaped with meager possessions. Robb halted them, sending men to question them gently about the conditions farther north. The refugees told harrowing tales of roving bands of Ironborn or outlaws who had sacked villages near the coast. Worse, they spoke of rumors that a warlord or bastard knight had commandeered certain strongholds. Catelyn and Robb exchanged a glance, suspecting that might mean Ramsay Snow. None of the refugees knew anything definite of Winterfell's present state, though all had heard it was burned. They gave the refugees what aid they could spare, some bread, a bit of salt, and advised them to head south to safer lands. Then they pressed on. The next 2 nights, they camped in wooded glades, each time sending out scouts in a wide perimeter. The Grey John grumbled that they were not moving quickly enough, but Robb insisted on caution, not wishing to blunder into an ambush set by Bolton's bastard or stray Ironborn. Finally, the day came when the blackened walls of Winterfell rose into sight against a cloudy sky. The ruin was a stark silhouette on the horizon, half-shrouded by drifting smoke from fires that still smoldered in the collapsed structures. Catelyn's breath caught painfully. She remembered the castle as it once was, solid granite walls, tall towers crowned with banners, the warm steam from the hot springs. Now the outer gates appeared damaged. One tower was missing its top. Even from a distance, the devastation was clear. The yard beyond the walls looked littered with wreckage. For an instant, tears threatened to blur her vision, but she steeled herself. There was no time for indulgent grief. Robb signaled a halt. Grey Wind growled softly, as though sensing something amiss. The Great John and other commanders rode up to form a knot around Robb. "We'll send a small party forward to see who holds the castle," Robb said. "The main gates might still be blocked or booby-trapped. We must be prepared for anything." Catelyn gazed hard at the castle she had once called home with Ned. If it was truly empty, they might walk in uncontested. If not, they had to consider another siege. Her heart twisted with sorrow and anger. Winterfell, seat of House Stark, reduced to a charred skeleton. What had once been the vibrant home for her children lay gutted by cruelty and betrayal. A scout rode out, cautiously approaching the gates. 2 others flanked him. After some time, they returned, reporting that the gates stood partially ajar, scorched, and that no guards were visible on the walls. The place seemed deserted, though they had glimpsed movement, perhaps a handful of people lurking within. Could be squatters, or survivors, or some hidden foe. Robb decided they would advance as a group, but remain on high alert. So they rode closer, pushing through the blackened gates, peering warily at the broken courtyard. The gloom of the day gave the place a funereal air. Ash and soot stained every stone. Several structures near the walls had collapsed in on themselves, charred beams jutting at odd angles. The keep itself stood battered but still upright, though its roof in parts had caved in. The stables were half-burned and the castle's famed glass gardens were shattered. The stench of old smoke and decay hung thick in the air. Catelyn dismounted slowly, her legs trembling. She remembered the bustle of Winterfell's courtyard, the stable boys running to take horses, the blacksmith's clang of metal. Now only silence greeted them, broken by the uneasy pawing of horses. Robb stepped forward, gaze sweeping across the devastation. She could read the heartbreak etched on his face. This was the ruin of their ancestral home, the seat of the kings in the north for countless generations. Men fanned out carefully, checking corners, searching for traps or signs of an occupying force. They found no soldiers, only broken doors, scattered debris, and an eerie hush. Eventually, they discovered a small group of survivors holed up in the Great Hall, mostly kitchen. Women, a few old guards with bandaged limbs, and a pair of children who clung to their mother's skirts. They looked half-starved and terrified, but relief dawned in their eyes at the sight of Robb and the dire wolf banners. Some wept openly, crying, "The Starks have returned." The old Castellan, or what remained of the staff, was nowhere to be seen. The group's spokesperson was a grizzled guard named Willis, who had served House Stark for many years. His face lit with tears when he beheld Robb. "My lord, my king, you've come at last." Robb's voice cracked. "What happened here, Willis?" Willis bowed his head. "After Theon Greyjoy seized the castle, it all went poorly. Then Lord Bolton's bastard came. He pretended to side with the Starks, but he sacked the place, burned it, most of us fled or were killed. Some were taken captive. We few survived by hiding in the crypts and the lower cellars, scrounging for food. Haven't seen any bandits for some time now, nor the bastard's men. They left or turned on each other. We weren't sure. We're just living here with ghosts." Catelyn stepped forward, feeling tears burn behind her eyes. "My sons, Bran and Rickon, do you know aught of what happened to them?" Willis swallowed hard, glancing away. "We heard they were dead, my lady. Theon Greyjoy said so. The bodies, or what Theon claimed were their bodies, were put on display, burned beyond recognition. But we never truly believed it. Some said the boys escaped. We don't know." His voice faltered. "Theon took credit for killing them, but the rumors, oh my lady, I pray they're still alive somewhere." Catelyn pressed a hand to her mouth, hope and dread warring within her. She had heard such rumors before, but now, standing in the scorched remains of Winterfell, it felt more real. They might be alive, or they might be lost in these endless horrors. She took a trembling breath. "Thank you, Willis." Robb embraced the older guard, clasping him by the shoulders. "You did well to survive. We're here now. House Stark is not dead. We will rebuild as best we can." At that, a few of the survivors let out sobs of relief, though the sorrow in the air was overwhelming. Robb ordered that food be brought in from their supply wagons. The Great John set men to clearing debris, ensuring the gates could be closed and secured. There was much to do: bury the dead, see to the wounded, salvage what they could from the wreckage. Winterfell, though battered, would once again be the seat of the king in the north. That evening, they set up a command post in what remained of the Great Hall, though half the roof was gone, leaving it open to the sky. Great tables were turned upright amid the rubble. Men ate salted beef and hard bread, washing it down with whatever ale survived in the cellars. Robb spoke quietly with the Great John and other lords, planning the next steps. Restoring basic fortifications, sending messages to the lords of the north, calling them to rally at Winterfell and renew their oaths. Catelyn found a moment's solitude in the courtyard where the night sky spilled faint starlight on blackened stones. Her heart ached with memories of Ned. She recalled how he would greet her in this courtyard whenever she returned from the south. How Sansa and Arya would run about, giggling with each other. How Bran once climbed the walls. How Rickon chased the direwolves. She closed her eyes, letting silent tears roll down her cheeks. Perhaps the gods had spared them from the Red Wedding, but the cost was still immense. She heard footsteps. Brienne again. She turned to see the taller woman approach, her broad face filled with empathy. "My lady," Brienne said softly, "I won't disturb you long, but I wanted to be sure you're safe." Catelyn wiped her cheeks and cleared her throat. "Thank you, Brienne. I only needed a moment to remember." Brienne looked around at the scorched courtyard, the collapsed tower. "It must be hard." Catelyn nodded. "Harder than I can say. But this is still our home, and we will not let it fall to ruin forever. Robb will see it rebuilt. We'll plant new seeds in these ashes if the gods grant us time." Brienne glanced at a distant corner of the yard where a couple of Stark guards were rummaging for salvageable timber. "Tomorrow we can help with the clearing," she said. "We can check the keep for any hidden survivors or lurking foes." "Yes," Catelyn agreed. "And then we must plan how to deal with the rest of the north. The Drefort, for one. Roose Bolton may rot in chains, but his bastard is at large. We can't rest until every threat is put down." Her voice caught, and she added, "and until we find what truly happened to Bran and Rickon." Brienne's gaze was steady. "If they live, we will find them. I swear it." Catelyn mustered a small, grateful smile. "Let us hope. The gods know I've prayed enough." They parted, each lost in thought. Catelyn wandered slowly to the godwood, not sure what she would find. The path was strewn with debris. At last, she came upon the old iron gate that led inside. The once lush canopy had been scorched in places, but pockets of greenery survived, nourished by the hot springs that still bubbled faintly. The heart tree, the ancient weirwood with its carved face, stood battered but upright, its red leaves rustling in a faint breeze. Kneeling by the pool, Catelyn bowed her head. Though she was raised in the faith of the Seven, she had learned to honor the old gods in Ned's domain. She whispered a prayer, uncertain if it was heard. The carved face in the weirwood seemed to watch her, tears of red sap slowly trailing from its carved eyes. She wished Ned were here. He would have known how to comfort her, how to guide their family through this ruin. At length, she rose, feeling the chill more acutely. She made her way back to the great hall. Robb was there, conferring with the Great John and other lords about the best way to fortify Winterfell. They spoke of building palisades where walls had collapsed, of sending ravens to the Manderleys at White Harbor, the Glovers at Deepwood Motte, the Serwyns, the Tallhearts, the remaining Umbers. A full council of northern lords would be called to pledge their loyalty anew and to witness Bolton's trial. After some discussion, Robb turned to Catelyn. "Mother, do you agree that we should have Roose Bolton brought here to face judgment before the gathered lords?" She considered, recalling the vile man languishing in captivity. "Yes, that is best. Let them see that House Stark has uncovered his betrayal and will not flinch from justice. Make it public so that no other house dares try what he tried." The Great John rumbled his approval. "I will let the crows feast on his bones once the lords pronounce their verdict. And if we find his bastard still lurking in the north, we'll deal with him as well." Robb nodded solemnly. "Let it be done. I'll dispatch riders to Moat Cailin, instructing that Bolton be brought north under heavy guard. I want them to move quickly and watch for ambush." He paused, then added, "We'll need to see if any of the Karstarks remain loyal. We lost their lord." A shadow crossed his face as he recalled how he had executed Lord Rickard Karstark for killing young Lannister prisoners. But perhaps the sons or cousins of that house will yet serve the king in the north. "Or resent you," the Great John muttered, but no one answered that directly. Night drew on, and a cold wind blew over the broken battlements. Men wrapped themselves in cloaks, huddling around meager fires in the courtyard and the half-intact chambers. Some found straw bedding in unburned corners, though the smell of smoke and charred wood lingered. Catelyn tried to settle in the remains of the Lord's Solar, where a portion of the ceiling still stood, but found little comfort. She kept thinking of the children, of Sansa and Arya far to the south, of Bran and Rickon, their fates uncertain. Even Jon Snow on the wall, Ned's bastard but still her stepson in a sense, occasionally pricked her thoughts. The family was scattered like leaves in a storm. When sleep finally claimed her, nightmares rose. Fleeting images of a wedding feast drenched in blood, crossbowmen perched overhead, Walder Frey cackling at the head of the table, Bolton's cold eyes slicing into her. She saw Winterfell in flames, Ned's head on a spike, her daughters weeping. She jolted awake, heart pounding, and realized dawn was breaking through a gap in the broken ceiling. Another day of war. The next weeks became a blur of reconstruction and anxious waiting. Robb established a rudimentary seat in Winterfell, focusing first on making the castle defensible. The Great Jon supervised the repair of the walls, aided by the strongest men among them. Brienne threw herself into the labor, carrying heavy stones and beams, though Catelyn worried that such tasks did not befit her status. Yet Brienne seemed content to lend her strength, and the men were too awed by her prowess to object. Messengers fanned out across the north, calling lords and lesser nobles to come to Winterfell and reaffirm their loyalty or face the king's wrath. The ravens that remained in Winterfell's battered rookery were put to use as well, though many had perished in the fire. Some houses responded swiftly: the Serwins, the Tallhearts, the Mormonts from Bear Island. Lady Meage Mormont herself arrived with a handful of fierce daughters and declared that House Mormont stood with the king in the north. Others, like the Riswells and Dustins, hesitated or sent guarded messages. The Manderleys in White Harbor promised support, but they wrestled with ire-born raids on their coast. As the loyal Northmen trickled in, the morale in Winterfell slowly rose. Repairs were slow but steady. A keep was cleared of rubble, halls were patched, and living quarters were established for new arrivals. The Great Hall remained half open to the sky, so they gathered for councils in a smaller side hall that had survived the flames. Robb named a temporary castellan to oversee day-to-day matters, but he himself took charge of the greater decisions. His young face still bore the weight of kingship, yet there was a new steel in him, forged by what he had endured. Catelyn spent her days helping to organize supplies, ration out food, and receive travelers. Often, she found herself comforting the survivors of the sacking, hearing their stories of terror. Some had seen Theon's men kill their kin, others had watched Ramsay Snow commit atrocities. She consoled them as best she could, though every new horror story hardened her resolve. Roose Bolton's line must be extinguished, she thought with a righteous fury. For all the evils they had unleashed, they deserved no quarter. About 2 weeks after they arrived, a mounted column approached Winterfell bearing the banners of House Glover and House Reed. Leading them was Galbart Glover himself, escorting Roose Bolton, still in chains, and a pair of Crannogmen envoys. The sight of Bolton, pale as ever, dismounting under guard, sent a ripple of unease through the castle. He carried himself with his usual eerie composure, but he winced slightly from the wounds he had taken at the twins. He wore plain clothing now, without the flayed man sigil, and iron shackles clinked at his wrists. Robb received them in the smaller hall with half the northern lords present. Bolton was brought forth under heavy watch. The hush in the chamber was palpable. Men whispered curses at the traitor. Bolton inclined his head stiffly, meeting Robb's gaze without visible fear. "Roose Bolton," Robb said, voice echoing. "You stand accused of treason, conspiring with Walder Frey and Tywin Lannister to murder the king in the north and his retinue at the Twins. Your plan failed. Do you deny it?" Bolton's pale eyes flickered. "I will not insult you with denials, your grace," he said calmly. "What is done is done. I served your cause once until it became clear it was doomed. I sought a better path for House Bolton. Your mother discovered my intentions before I could act." A growl rose from the assembled lords. The Great Jon spat. "He confesses. Hang him now." But Robb held up a hand. "He will face the judgment of the assembled northern lords, and we shall see how House Stark deals with treachery." He looked to the side, where Catelyn stood, and she met his gaze firmly. She wanted nothing more than to see Bolton pay for his betrayal. But she also understood the need for a formal condemnation. Over the next 2 days, the lords held a moot of sorts in the old tradition, gathering in the courtyard under the open sky. They heard testimonies. From those who had fought at the Twins, from Bolton's own men who had confessed under pressure, from spies who had intercepted letters. It was a somber, methodical process. At the end, every lord present agreed. Roose Bolton was guilty of high treason and must die. Robb announced the sentence at dusk. standing beneath the heart tree in the godswood. Bolton was brought before him, bound. The northern lords and their retinues formed a circle under the rustling red leaves. A hush fell as Robb drew his sword. Following the old ways, a king in the north might mete out justice personally. Catelyn watched, feeling a tremor inside. Ned had always said, "He who passes the sentence should swing the sword." Robb hesitated a fraction, then squared his shoulders. "Roose Bolton, you sought to destroy House Stark and hand the north to our enemies. You are condemned to die. Have you last words?" Bolton regarded him in silence for a moment, then said softly, "I only regret that I failed." His eyes shifted, as if searching for Catelyn's gaze, but she stared back with cold resolve. "The north is a harsh land, your grace," Bolton added, almost a whisper. "You will find it less forgiving than you imagine." Robb said nothing further. He raised his blade, Ice, the ancestral sword of House Stark, which had been returned to him after Ned's death, though in this altered timeline, traveling with the army. The setting sun glinted on the steel. With a clean stroke, Robb ended Roose Bolton's life. Blood stained the grass, and the Watchers exhaled as one, a mixture of grim satisfaction and lingering horror at the finality of it. Silence hung in the air. Then the Great John roared, "The traitor is dead! Long live the king in the north!" A ragged chorus rose in response. Some men spat on Bolton's corpse, others turned away. Catelyn closed her eyes, letting out a slow breath. One threat ended, yet she thought of Ramsay Snow, the bastard who might yet roam free. Another serpent lurking. In the days that followed, ravens took flight across the north, carrying news that Roose Bolton had been executed for treason by order of the king in the north. Lesser lords who might have wavered now saw that Robb Stark would brook no betrayal. Slowly, more houses bent the knee. A few, however, remained silent, most notably the Riswells, who were kin to House Bolton by marriage, and the Dustons of Barrowton, who had their own grievances. Catelyn participated in councils discussing whether to march on the Dreadfort or first secure White Harbor. The Manderleys had mustered a large force to repel the Ironborn on the coast, so it was possible that uniting with them might prove more beneficial before turning to the inland strongholds. Meanwhile, rumors swirled that Stannis Baratheon had retreated to the Wall, fighting wildlings. In the south, Tywin Lannister remained formidable, though busied with King's Landing politics. Sometimes, the memory of the near disaster at the Twins haunted Catelyn. She would see a flicker of candlelight on a stone wall and recall crossbows aimed at Robb's heart. Then she would remind herself that they had outwitted that fate. Through vigilance and cunning, they had survived. Walder Frey was dead, Roose Bolton was dead, and House Stark lived. Still battered, still grieving, but unbroken. She pressed Robb about his plans regarding Sansa and Arya. "We must find a way to free Sansa from King's Landing," she said. "The Lannisters might wed her off to Tyrion or anyone else to secure claims on the north." Robb nodded, face tight. "I wish I could ride south with an army and storm the city, but we're in no position for that. We must secure the north first. If we're strong enough, perhaps we can broker her freedom. Or perhaps an alliance with another kingdom can help us." But for now his voice trailed off. Catelyn understood. The realm was still a patchwork of warring factions. Even if Stannis might share an enmity with the Lannisters, trusting him was uncertain. She clung to the hope that Tywin might be forced into negotiations, or that Sansa could find a way out. As for Arya, no one had word of her. Occasionally, travelers brought wild rumors of a wolf girl seen with outlaws, but nothing solid. Autumn deepened. The winds blew colder across the plains around Winterfell. Caravans of supply began to arrive from White Harbor, where House Manderley's pledge of loyalty finally translated into provisions. Farmers from more distant corners of the north trickled in as well, bringing grains or salted meat to trade. Life gradually returned to the battered castle. The ring of hammers sounded as new timbers rose to reinforce the walls. Smoke curled from the chimneys again, a semblance of normality, or at least a readiness for the next phase of war. One late afternoon, as Catelyn walked the ramparts recently rebuilt, she looked out over the courtyard where men drilled with spears. In the distance, the charred skeletons of outer buildings still littered the grounds, but the worst of the rubble had been cleared. She felt a certain grim pride. House Stark endured. They had avoided the doom that might have claimed them at the Twins. Though the losses were great, though sorrow still weighed her every breath, she told herself that something like hope remained. If the old gods willed it, Robb would keep the North united. They would scour away the lingering poisons left by the Boltons and the Greyjoys. Perhaps one day they might look beyond the North's borders to rescue Sansa or salvage some measure of peace. And if her younger sons lived, perhaps they would find their way home. That evening, as the dusk settled into an amber glow, Robb joined her on the ramparts. Together, they gazed at the swirl of men and horses below, the banners snapping in the breeze. Grey wind prowled at Robb's side, sniffing the air. A hush fell between mother and son. She thought of how, not so long ago, they had been on the brink of annihilation at the Red Wedding that never was. Now they stood together at Winterfell, battered but unbroken. Robb said quietly, "Sometimes I wonder if Father watches us now from the afterlife. If he sees that we've avenged him in some small way, ended Bolton, ended Fry, reclaimed our home." Catelyn placed a hand on his arm. "If he does, I'm sure he's proud. You have done what was necessary, Robb. The wolves are not so easily slain." He nodded, jaw set. "We'll face what comes next, no matter how dark. The North remembers." "The North remembers," Catelyn echoed softly, recalling that ancient phrase. Below them, the courtyard lamps flickered, men's voices drifting upwards. The night air carried the faint sense of pine and snowmelt, a reminder that winter was at their doorstep. But in that moment, mother and son stood side by side, lords loyal below, the dire wolf keeping watch. The memory of betrayal had not vanished, yet it no longer clutched at their throats. House Stark was alive. And if winter was coming, they would meet it with teeth bared, as wolves do, ready to endure and rise again when springtime called. They lingered there, letting the dusk settle into night. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, rallies of lords, uncertain alliances, talk of vengeance against the bastard of Bolton. But for one quiet moment, Catelyn allowed herself the grace of believing they could find a path forward. They had turned the tables at the twins. Now, in the heart of the North, they stood poised for whatever lay ahead, the bright spark of defiance alive in every breath they drew.